April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller's smirk. Through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5, he watched them climb. 16 silhouettes. Ungainly. Laboring. Struggling against gravity like fat men climbing stairs. Die Amis haben uns fliegende Milchflaschen geschickt, he transmitted to his wingman. The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles. Below, the Republic P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group clawed for altitude. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines screaming against 7 tons of aircraft. To German pilots, men who had danced with Spitfires over Britain and dueled Soviet Yaks above Stalingrad, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. Barrel-shaped fuselages, greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for bodies too large, propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. Priller had shot down 101 aircraft by this April morning. He knew what a fighter looked like. This wasn't it. What Priller didn't know, what none of the wolves circling above could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically annihilate the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would transform from objects of derision into instruments of industrial terror. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad wings. 8 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire exceeding 6,000 rounds per minute. Enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The laughter would not last. The P-47 Thunderbolt emerged from panic. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, and doctrine, subscribe now. Turn on notifications and stay tuned for more in-depth World War II analysis. Let's continue. June 1940. German fighters swept across France like a scythe through wheat. In a Long Island factory, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Corps. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor, something to match the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster. It will be a dinosaur, he admitted to his team. But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor. The massive turbo supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time asked the same question. This thing actually flies. Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The turbo supercharger was the key. Fed by exhaust gases, it delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere. Where the air was too thin for conventional superchargers, where German fighters gasped for oxygen, where the Thunderbolt thrived. The R2800 double Wasp, 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet. Could climb to 42,000 feet. Could operate in the death zone where Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts became sluggish, unresponsive, vulnerable. But mastering the beast came at a terrible cost. Major Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in its first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing, torque rolled on takeoff, and it dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shockwaves formed on the wings, the aircraft hurtling earthward as if possessed. But those who survived training discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would become one of America's top aces, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters confirmed every German prejudice. April and May 1943. The P-47s couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Bf-109s at medium altitudes, couldn't match their nimble handling where most dogfights occurred. Luftwaffe pilots developed tactics immediately. Attack from below where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled, force turning fights, exploit their sluggishness. Priller reported to Luftwaffe High Command after his first encounter, "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indianer, fat targets pretending to be warriors." The statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early encounters. Something German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. Damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. And when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergent zone of destruction that German pilots had never experienced. Unlike rifle-caliber weapons or cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds. An eternity in aerial combat. June 26, 1943. Over Forges-les-Eaux, France. The event that would begin changing German perceptions. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron was returning from escort duty when his formation of 48 P-47s was bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from the Sonners Chasseur JG-26. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers. What happened in those first seconds would have killed any other pilot in any other aircraft. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit. The engine cowling was torn away. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel, tried to bail out. The canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, the pilot's identity still debated by historians, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. The German positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire. 4 20mm cannon, 2 13mm machine guns, point-blank range. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. The German repositioned and fired again, this time with machine guns only. Still, it flew. The German pilot pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck that refused to die. Johnson could see his face clearly through his shattered canopy. Young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. The German repositioned and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 208. On one side, the total was likely over 400. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving combat reports from the Sire, JG-26, initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight, use your power, use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as a fatal flaw, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical plunge. This speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin developed what became known as boom and zoom, though pilots had another name for it, the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead, the combined firepower creating an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. January 1944. A new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter, with broad-chord blades that bit into the air like massive oars. The improvement was immediate, dramatic, terrifying. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute, the paddle blade variants achieved 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. Hauptmann Heinrich Knucke of JG-11, a veteran of over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar, created by blade tips reaching supersonic speeds, could be heard from miles away. German ground troops learned to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone. A deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They called it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. August 17, 1943, the dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that date. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-110 destroyer aircraft positioning to attack B-17s. The twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. A German gunner who survived later recounted in a POW interrogation, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down. Destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage. Tail severed. Crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a Bf-110 became nothing. 8 Messerschmitts were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced over 100 projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. October 8, 1943, over Bremen. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, 206 victories, one of Germany's greatest aces, led Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet. His Focke-Wulf 190A6 was sluggish, unresponsive. The BMW 801 engine, powerful at medium altitudes, was gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. His combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both Eastern and Western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The report delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. Service ceiling, exceeding 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Dive speed, approaching the sound barrier. Armor, 3 to 8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, 1 to 2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, armored deflection plates around the engine. Damage tolerance. Could absorb punishment that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of JG-2, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our Gruppe. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain." In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics from June alone: 651 locomotives destroyed 3,847 trucks, destroyed 512 tanks, and armored vehicles destroyed 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night. The psychological effect was complete. German soldiers developed what medical officers documented as Jabo fever. Jabo fever. physical symptoms of stress appearing when Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before P-47s appeared. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them Jabos, fighter bombers. But these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. January 1, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured German pilot was brought to the command post. He pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legend throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D-40s filled the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 230 pilots in Bodenplatte, including irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. Losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 1,583 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour, around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained Tubu 400 components machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded peacetime standards. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots by war's end were entering combat with less than 100 hours total flight time. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, "I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, studied gun camera film from actual combat. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight." March 1945. Joseph Pips. Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials seeking to boost morale. His statement was deemed too demoralizing for publication. It revealed the complete transformation in German attitudes. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents. Unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose one, it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage, and courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. April 1945. The Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wings separated. I barely escaped. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire staffel. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. Phoenix, Arizona. A reunion of German and American fighter pilots, former adversaries meeting in peace. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former commander of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His response was recorded on video. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat," we said. "They built a bomber and called it a fighter." We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win. They were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable. The visibility excellent. The controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a 2-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits among other legendary fighters. Its placard lists specifications and battle honors. But the real story is told by a small display case. Spent .50 caliber shells. A strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. And below the display, a quote from an unnamed German pilot, taken from a 1945 interrogation report. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you and you ceased to exist." The laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision. It ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of lead. German pilots laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.